would be a good person to put on as well.
But then if they're like, I don't, but then like there's this, or will those sections of how they were part of that review, will that change from like in writing our conference call because it's teaming and coaching
Which is
happening?
also in writing. But Kimberly, let's follow up after this and talk
Okay.
this through so you feel comfortable.
But I tried to record and it didn't do anything. Can we?
It's recording now.
I marked recording on the cloud. I hope that is what we needed to do, or somebody
Okay,
else could switch it. But it's on my computer now, or in the cloud.
okay, great. Okay, next slide. Sounds like we're ready to move on. Different types of IFSP meetings that we're going to talk about today: the interim, the initial, the 6-month, transition, other types of reviews, and annuals. So an interim IFSP, the most important thing to know about an interim IFSP is if you haven't heard about it, it's because it's very, very rare. We don't typically see them. But they do exist in regulation and we have to address them in policy, and they are a possibility for a family if they are needed. So the important things to know about this is that it's if you were to go to a home visit and you can just see that this child is clearly going to be eligible for our program and they need services right now. We cannot wait 45 days to write a plan and get them in services. They need services right now. This sometimes comes up when kids are in danger of things like getting a tummy tube if they're not gaining weight, and you walk in and see that the feeding stuff is just haywire, and you really want to get your feeding specialist in there to do some work early. You still have to do all the required things. You still, like right then, you would provide prior written notice, fill out the FSC information on an IFSP, fill out the service table. What is it that the services that you're going to immediately give to the family? And the family would sign that IFSP. It would be an interim IFSP at that point. It has to be completed with all the other components within 45 days. So you still have to get the 2 people, doing your multidisciplinary evaluation and assessment. You have to get the family to sign all the appropriate consents. You have to do that, all the rest of the work that you would typically do. I sometimes ask if anybody's done one of these, or if there's any questions that are coming up. Tammy, do we need to go into any more? They're pretty rare, you guys, because most of the time what we do is we kick it in gear and get that family seen as quickly as possible and through our process as quickly as possible. Most families are going to follow this typical sequence, right? Upon referral, they have some first contacts with the program. They get their evaluation and assessment done. If they're eligible for services and the family wants to continue, then we have an IFSP meeting, and all of that happens within 45 days. On an initial IFSP, every page is completed and every item is addressed. So unless it's not age appropriate. So the transition pages, for example, aren't addressed unless the child's of transition age. If an item or a section of the IFSP is not applicable to a specific child, it's a good idea to put NA in the box or in that line. So just an NA for the fact that there's no alternative contact person. You don't have to put it on every line, just one simple one stands for the whole box of information. The family has to be in attendance, and the person who facilitates an IFSP meeting is the FSC. So if you are also the most likely service provider, at that point that you are writing the IFSP, you are the family service coordinator and facilitating that IFSP meeting. At least one other team member contributes to the initial IFSP. And as we were just talking about, this is most often the evaluators. and they most often contribute in the development in writing, but they can come to the meeting if they're able to. Another likely candidate to be at a meeting, a second person, would be somebody who's going to be providing services to the family, but hasn't met them yet. So that would be a great opportunity at the initial IFSP meeting. If you're thinking, I'm going to be bringing this person in, have them come to the initial IFSP and meet the family. The family has the right, again, to invite anybody that they wish. So once again, our processes, our communication, our timelines have to allow time for the family to be actually able to do that so that they feel supported by the people they want to have at the meeting. If you have any questions about that before we go on. Got head shakes. So following the initial IFSP meeting, the document must be reviewed at least once every 6 months. And so in the new database, it'll work somewhat like the current database in that the review IFSP would be populated by new information, and the initial IFSP will stay just the way it was when you wrote the initial IFSP. The 6-month review has to include the review and updates of the outcomes pages and review and updates of the service page. If those two things are not updated, it does not count as a 6-month review. On the services page, people ask this one, both the service block and the service description should be updated. So updating just the service block without explaining the updates of the service block, it's got you half there, right? So make sure that we're doing both parts. Any additional page can be updated. So if there's new medical information, if you've done some follow-up of initial vision or hearing, especially if they didn't pass their initial vision and hearing, that's a great time to add some of that information. A new change that will be effective with the new policies that are planned to begin on July 1 is that review meetings have to be multidisciplinary, meaning that someone from the team involved. So we've already talked about that as well, just making sure that they get noted. The IFSP review agreement pages and the parent signs and the participants, they are also completed for a 6-month review. We must include the family and the FSC, preferably in person, but other ways such as Zoom are also acceptable as long as it's agreeable to the family and other participants. And we want to make sure that we are staying somewhat, making sure that we stay consistent as a team. We also want it to be a alternative method that makes sense. So texting back and forth and calling that an IFSP meeting is probably not a good idea. We want at least like a Zoom or an in-person, something like that happening. Any questions about a 6-month review? You guys are on it. We're going to continue. If something comes up, Tammy, let me know. So transition and other reviews. So a transition or other type of reviews involve working just on a specific part of the IFSP, and it's outside of a 6-month required timeline. So sometimes you can get your transition to line up with the annual review or the 6-month review, but sometimes it doesn't line up well. And so you have to hold it outside those time limits. Another reason for having an other review would be that the child has run out of outcomes and I don't have any outcomes to be working on. We know that always has to be at least one child outcome. or something significant has changed. And so the plan that you thought you were going to do is not the plan that's happening at all with this family. And so it's a good idea to reconnect with that family, kind of sit down again and say, what should the new plan look like, given whatever it is that has happened, to make that plan not work. So any of those significant changes. When an other review is due, then we only have to do the paperwork associated with whatever those changes are that we're talking about. So for a transition, for example, we do the transition pages, right? And of course, signatures. For an other type of review that involves writing a new outcome, we might have to look at the services page 2 and make sure they match. We might have to look at the family resources and priorities page and make sure that somewhere we are writing this outcome based on a concern that the family has, and make sure that that's updated in order to do that. A few more things about transition and other IFSP reviews is that any page of the IFSP can be updated during the review, but usually only specific pages are completed, again, in relation to why you're having that. So there's no rule that says you can't update more. IFSP meetings are most commonly completed in person again, but this would be allowed to be held electronically or by other means as well. Any questions about transition and other reviews?
There is a question in the chat regarding documentation of that second discipline.
And there's one before that too. So if we reviewed the IFSP prior to 6 months, would we still have to do the review? Oh, will you talk about the 6-month review timeline? So
yeah, the 6 month,
yeah, go
sure.
ahead.
The 6-month review timeline needs to be completed relatively at the 6-month part. It can be held early. It cannot be late. Again, if it meets the requirements of what needed to be done. So if you did the outcome statements got reviewed and you noted the progress on there, if you looked at the service table and the service description and noted the progress on there, in addition to whatever else it was that you were doing, then it can count as a 6-month review. Relatively timely within that 6-month period. So if you're 3 months early, probably not going to count as a 6-month review. But if you're a month or two early, then you probably are okay. Tammy, do you have more on that?
I take
Do you see it differently?
I don't, a little bit. If you count whatever that meeting is as your 6-month review, you have to use the date to count out 6 months and do one, because it's no more than 6 months. So if you use the 6 months rate, you're going to have to do it at 9 months, and it gets kind of confusing. And so sometimes it's just easier if you leave the updates as updates and leave your 6-month review closer to 6 months. Because you are determining when you do it, whether you're counting that as the 6-month review, and it does impact when the next time you do a review has to be. And so I don't think Barbara's way is wrong.
Yeah, I think
that's it. It's like, how do you want to do it? Be mindful of what you're calling that meeting, because how you calculate your dates from there are going to mess with you and matter. And so if you did do even a month early, then I would recommend always doing the annual at least a month early, rather than do a 6-month and then turn around and do the annual, right? And so, like all FSC things, just pay attention to your dates and know what you're calling that meeting, because it's going to impact your next steps.
And I think
and that's exactly, we kind of get to the same place. It's because it's a moving target. If you do one early, now we have to do the next one early. So how early does the annual become? If we're moving it up 1 month, it feels pretty comfortable. If we start moving around like more than 2 months, it starts feeling really uncomfortable. So instead of having to have additional reviews, trying to stay as close to the 6-month mark as possible for a 6-month review.
I think
If you
from
need to have one of those other quick reviews, sorry, Misty, again, it's only the pieces of paperwork that need to be done and the signature pages that would have to be done at an other review. And that could happen more quickly, as Tammy's saying. So yeah, it's really how do you want to follow up as you go, because your timeline for annuals is always 1 year from the initial.
and I think for me, I guess the biggest thing to remember is 6 month is no more than. So in all of this discussion that you had, as long as you remember that, and I think this idea of having an other type of review actually makes it pretty handy in terms of the timelines and following the timelines. That's something that's being described as a little bit different. So that's all I had to add.
So there's still questions about how do you document a secondary provider? And so yeah, go ahead.
Can I go ahead? We'll see it on the pages, but just like you're doing now for an initial, you are writing on the initial. The person who is there at the meeting goes in the signature block, if you will, right? And then there's a part below where it says other people who participated, and we'll see it on the form in a little bit. Other people who participated in the development. We count quarterlies, team meeting discussions, coaching opportunities as other people who contributed to the development. So you can pick any of those team members who were at those meetings and add them to participating in the development. Does that make sense? We'll see it on the pages when we get there too. So let's go on. So when we talk about updates to the IFSP, these are the little things that you want to be able to update that you don't want to hold a review meeting for. This isn't about getting more services or changing how services look. This is updates that can be made without having a meeting. So when it comes to name changes, if you're changing the FSC, you have to have a meeting. Sorry. If the FSC is changing from one person to another, that can only happen in the review, in the context of an IFSP review, so that the family has that happen before this new person comes in. For other team members, like on the services page, your speech therapist is going on 3 months maternity leave. You can change the name of the person and update that IFSP to a new person as long as everything else is staying the same. So they're still going to go in 6 times per quarter for 30 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever. As long as the rest of the line stays the same, the service provider name only can change. Does that make sense? So information that we don't need to discuss as a team. So follow-up of health, follow-up of vision or hearing, demographic information that might change, medical coverage, child gets a new doctor, has a new doctor appointment, transition planning steps that we are starting to work on some new updates to the transition planning steps. Right now in our current database, programs have a variety of ways that they are holding on to some of this information and waiting for the next time that they're going to put it into the IFSP when they hold a review. And what is somewhat exciting about our new database is that most of that information is being transferred into the database side. So you'll be able to go into the database side of the database and put that new information in without changing what the IFSP looks like. And then when you go to do the next IFSP, it will be in there for you. So you won't have to keep it on a separate note or some sticky note on the child's, FSC log or something like that. You'll be able to make them in the database. So again, just to review, those kind of changes we'll be able to put in more easily. Those are the kinds of changes that are allowed by regulation to happen without there needing to be a review. It's basically anytime you're not doing outcomes and services. Sorry,
Yep.
Tammy.
So one of the questions in the chat that says, what if the service provider is a different discipline? Then yes, you would have to do a review because you're changing the actual service itself. So if that helps clarify, you are correct.
Anything else? Nope, that's it. Awesome. So an annual IFSP is when the annual assessment is done and then documented onto the annual IFSP. So this includes completion of the CBA, and that has to be, it can be accomplished over the course of the year. It doesn't have to be a separate testing type visit. It can be that, it doesn't have to be that. So ongoing assessment where you're completing your CBA, you're updating your RBI as part of the My Child Story, you're completing new echo statements. So all of that is happening for an annual IFSP meeting. Back in the day when we used to only have paper, we would talk about how you bring out a whole new empty IFSP and start filling it in. So we know that that's not how databases work now, and it's not how it's going to work. You will be updating the information. Your old IFSPs will stay intact the way they are. New information will transfer into the annual IFSP. Annual assessment has to include the participation of at least 2 providers from different disciplines. This is a bit of a change, but it includes the participation of. So again, if you had joint visitors come to home visits, if you had peer coaching opportunities, if you had those kinds of opportunities where you're talking in coaching sessions or quarterly meeting notes where other people are participating, that can contribute to the annual assessment and the annual IFSP. We do not typically reevaluate children for eligibility. It's not something we would typically do just to have an annual IFSP meeting, because we do not in our policies have to do annual eligibility decisions. We just do the one when the child first comes in. So in that regard, it's not a reevaluation of the child unless the family and the team is considering that the child may no longer be eligible and want to go down that road prior to the annual IFSP being developed. A little bit more about annual. Like I said, it's like starting with a blank IFSP. Every page really should be reviewed. Any new information should be added. Any updates, you want to make sure they are there. And then you get those new signatures at the end of the meeting. Any questions, Tammy? Misty?
Yes,
So
use the same eligibility statement on the initial IFSP. Yep, that's one of the information pieces that come over. Sorry.
Yeah.
That was
That's
really
okay.
rough.
No, I wasn't sure I wanted to get into it, but when we get to the pages, we do know that one A, B, and C on the page is updated. And so that gets a little confusing for people sometimes. But eligibility, we're not making an eligibility determination based on that. So timing of the IFSP meetings, like we were saying early, it changes based on the actual meeting dates that happen. In our current database, we don't have a good way. It's not tracking based on the actual date that you did it. It's tracking based on the planned date. And so you all know that those of you who have been doing this for a while, you know you have to have your own tracking kind of system. In the new database, your dashboard will tell you who's coming up for a 6-month, who needs an annual. You'll be able to look and have at your fingertips based on the last actual meeting date. So it's nice in that it will be more helpful to you in keeping track of your dates. So basically all that means is if the initial IFSP was June 21st, then the 6-month has to be held, typically by December 21st, but you held yours early on November 12th. Then and combined it with the transition plan, then your annual IFSP now is due, needs to happen by May, so that you don't have to do another 6-month review in between. So what we were saying before, moving them up if we need to move them up. Transfer, for transfer children, there's one timeline and the dates follow him. So if a child transfers during that time of eligibility decision of 45 days, the new program doesn't get a new 45 days, does it? The new program, if they're transferring in those very first days, has to be able to help the family, as long as the family wants it, to have their IFSP in place by the end of that 45 days. If the family were to say something like, we are really busy with our move, can we put this off for a couple of weeks? Then it would be a family delay of the timeline. As far as dates in the IFSP, they don't, dates of the IFSP and the different pieces that may have occurred, they stay the same in the database. We don't put in new dates in the database. We have that initial referral to Part C that never changes, and then we have the referral to your program that tells that child's story. Anything else on this one? Timelines of IFSPs.
I do feel like in the new database, Emily, this is testing our knowledge too. So Barbara, correct me, that there you will be able to see a differentiation in the new database between initial, annual, 6-month, and other reviews. Where in the current database, you can't. But yes, we do think in the new database, it will be more clear. That's it. That's the question.
So what's new? Before we get into the form, we just want to make sure you understand that the database is still being built. We are still tweaking. It's very close. I would say this draft that I'm about to show you is a very close final draft. But there are a few tweaks that still might be necessary. Wording changes or button characteristics that will need to be different when we go live so that our IFSP can match up to how this database works. This IFSP will be available when we go live in the database, and that is currently planned at the end of April. That's right, isn't it, Tammy? End of April-ish. And so it's a little confusing. There will be some things to work out because the new policies are planned to go into effect on July 1st. So there may be sections of the IFSP that we ask you not to complete until after July 1st. I would assume that also means that we'll have a little grace. I think we're all going to need a little grace in the next year as this new database comes up and our new policies go into effect. IFSPs are going to work differently in this database. Instead of most of the FSCs, if you're used to going into an IFSP and completing the page by page in the new database, you will be going to different data panels or pages that don't necessarily look just like the IFSP. Some of them do. Some of them we have been able to say, no, we don't like what you have, and we absolutely have to have it look like this. Some of them we have to take that grain of salt and say, okay, we will have a new way of entering this information. So as we learn more about the database and as we do more trainings, you'll see which of the things are the same and which are a little bit different. When you enter the information on the screens, then the information will go from there and populate into the IFSP. So it doesn't, at this point in time, allow for you to complete an IFSP and then populate the database side. That actually is planned for year 2, but it would be most likely the whole year, right, completing before we actually got it. So hopefully in the future, we will have that you would be able to complete a PDF IFSP, upload it into the database, and it would then update all those database screens. What this does do is allow that flexibility that we talked about for updates, because you can go into any of the database pages and update information, and it's not necessarily doing anything to your IFSP until you want to print it. Tammy, did we have a question? You paused for a minute.
Yeah, and then I paused in my answer. It says, will it print out similar to the one now? The short answer is yes. And then she said, does it, we have locations that don't have access to online, have to print it out and work with it. I haven't looked at it close enough to see that piece. It looks the same. Does it have enough space for you to write and all of those things, Tammy? That'll be a good thing that we can look at. But it will sure print, like for families, copies, all of that looks exactly like it does now.
There was a second question, but it was also related to the database about what things will stay on and what things might get wiped out.
So let's go through the pages and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about more clearly. And that might answer some of those questions. And if it doesn't, please come back to the chat and ask again. We really do want to provide as much information as we have. And I'm just going to say still that disclaimer, things are still being built and tweaked. So we're giving you our best answers for what we know now. This is the new first page of the IFSP, and it looks very similar as far as the first top part with the child and family information. Again, you would enter this information differently into the database on a child information screen and then a family information screen. But it contains the same kind of information that you're used to gathering. There'll still be a KITS ID number, KECDS or KSEDS, or however you all are saying it in your program, the state, Trisha and her folks. are adding a secondary tracking number, something to do with KDHE. And as we learn more, we will be sharing that information so you feel fully informed about what that is as we move forward. And then a case number from the program is also still going to be available to you. What you don't see is all the important dates. And the reason for that is, again, in our old database, that was how we kept track of all that. That's how we had the plan, what you thought was going to happen, and all the dates. And then if you did something early, none of those dates changed. And so they weren't as helpful as they should be. The new database will do that in a different way. The regulations require that we include the FSC information on the IFSP, and that it is clearly available to families. And so FSC information is still there. We updated it just to have a phone number and email address.
And Barbara, we've got a couple requests for the page to be zoomed in a little bit. They're having a hard time seeing it, if that's possible.
Oh, how do you do that when you are showing part of your screen?
That's a good question.
I do not know how to do that when I'm showing part of my screen. So in the Basecamp folder for this meeting is a draft of the IFSP. And you can pull it down and see it more clearly. Tammy, do you know how I zoom in on the form if I am in presenter mode?
I think if the people viewing their screen enlarge their own view, it enlarges. At least it did for me. So you might try that. And that's on their end, not your end. But I don't know, Tammy, you might have better solution.
I don't have a good solution for this one. I was trying to play with it and see if I could make it work.
Can you put the Basecamp link in chat, Tammy?
Yep, will do.
So they can quickly go and grab a copy. And I apologize that you can't see it all. I am going to move forward. If you have continued questions, please put them in, and Misty's still monitoring that. Eligibility for Part C. So here we come. So this page does look a little bit different. Eligibility, you still will choose one area of eligibility and explain it. You go through, it is kind of a hierarchy. If the child is auto eligible and has a diagnosis that makes them have an established condition, we prefer that you check that box. If not, then we look at if developmental delay is applicable by the percentages of delay, the 25% in one or 20% in two, that makes that applicable. If neither of those, then you get to choose informed clinical opinion if you feel the child needs services. It continues to have an explanation for each of those. So auto-eligible, DD, and informed clinical opinion all have the text box where you explain how you came to that decision. You then put in the two team members from two different disciplines. We have 3 available. So if more people were involved, we have an additional spot for more. There is the ability in the database side to add even more if you really need to. We don't see that typically, so we didn't put it on the form. Then come to number 3, and there is a change in eligibility status. This is one of the new policies, again, that would be in effect when all the policies have been accepted, both by the state and OSEP, which we believe will be July 1st. If a child is found eligible under informed clinical opinion or developmental delay and is later diagnosed with a condition that makes them auto-eligible by an established risk, then we can change the eligibility of that child to reflect that they are now auto-eligible. And this allows them to stay in our services until they turn 3. That is the only change in eligibility status that is allowed. So you can't go the other way. You can't say the child was auto-eligible, but is now developmentally delayed. The only change in status is from either informed clinical opinion or developmental delay. Child gets a new diagnosis that now makes them auto-eligible. Questions?
Working through some eligibility points in the chat. I think we're okay. What about our kiddos with?
Hi, this is Kelly Mason. Can you guys hear me? I just have a quick question.
Sure.
So does this mean like kiddos that we find that their developmental delay at the initial eval and then maybe they get an ASD diagnosis, this is when we would use this, like change it down there?
Yes.
Okay. And so then would the eligibility date change when they get the ASD diagnosis?
Yes. So there would be a date, and now the child is auto-eligible, and then you would explain. Do you see that in number 3?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. Yeah.
Okay. And I just want to make sure, because on my old eyes and my little portion of the screen, I can't actually see it very well. I want to make sure that you guys are seeing it on the form.
So do we need to review and change their eligibility status? So the reason why this is on there is because we saw different programs across the state handling things like autism diagnosis specifically very differently. Some people were changing dates, some people were not changing dates, some people were leaving it, some people were not leaving it. So that is why section 3 is there. So on the new IFSP, everybody will have an ability to update their the eligibility status without messing with the other pieces of the IFSP.
And not to go into all the horrible things that can happen, but a child could be in a car accident and sustain a traumatic brain injury. A child could get very sick and get meningitis and become very medically involved. So eligibility status can change just in that case to go up to auto-eligible, because we want to keep them in services for their 3 years that it's possible to keep them in services.
Can I get some follow-up on the repaired cleft palate question? Because those kiddos are auto-eligible up to a year post-palate repair. So then can they move down to the developmental delay? Because a lot of them do continue to have a delay in language or other areas. So that's where I am kind of confused.
Right. So once a child is auto-eligible, they remain in auto-eligibility. There is no moving down to one of the others.
So if a child has a repaired cleft palate 1 year post-op, are they no longer eligible at all?
They remain auto-eligible. That is the current policy, and we have not changed that policy.
I agree. I have seen that in the manual for eligibility, like it's directly stated in the manual. So maybe that's something that needs to be looked at, the wording of it, because otherwise you should just remove that it's only for 1 year. So everybody stays on the same page.
Yes. And so the new manual will have the new information as far as each of those and what the new guidance will be. we that will be out for public comment as well in the future for 60 days, I believe it is. And so we'll have an opportunity to address that. I know that there are also programs who would like more definition around prematurity and some of the other things. How long does that apply to a child? And so that would be a great time. I'm just saying that at this time, this is the change that is in the new policies. If you have comments on the others, the old policy manual will no longer be in effect. The new policy manual will take over.
I just want to also remind folks that as your questions or ideas or concerns come up, we are recording this. So we have a recording in our chat about all the questions and verbal recording as well. And so that information will be reviewed again. So we're seeing some questions. They'll come up to the state leadership team. It'll be used probably in creating guidance documents and clarifying whatnot. So just want to throw that out there.
I do think the new policy has I don't want to call it a disclaimer. It has an additional statement on auto eligible as long as it applies. And so if there are parameters around things currently, most likely those parameters still exist for the new policy time period. So after July 1st. But at this time, we do not change the eligibility status. So if you would like to be able to change the eligibility status, that may need to be added to the policies. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing.
Well, can I just throw out, so I think in my head when I think about it, those like you said, we don't typically change eligibility. Once they're eligible, we continue to serve that child unless they are no longer qualifying. So as far as like the cleft palate, in my mind, I use that time frame as a determination of auto eligible for initial. So if I do an initial eval more than 1 year post repair, that's not going to make them auto eligible. If I do it 6 months post repair, they are still auto eligible. I mark that, and then I'm going to continue serving that kid without changing their eligibility. I guess that's what I see that as, is just their initial eligibility within 1 year post-op.
Thank you, McKinley. That's a really nice distinction as well, that we can include in consideration for the policy manual. I also should say that policy and procedure manual will be followed with a process manual. And so some of these more things that could change might be in the process manual versus the policy manual, and or in both. So it's a really good interpretation to take back to the state as we make sure that it says what it needs to in order for everyone to feel confident in following it. I am going to move us forward. So summary of relevant health information, what's not on the page, the primary care information, the insurance information, known or new diagnosis of deaf, blind, autism, all of that used to be on this page will now be on the database side, if you will. And we will enter that, and the IFSP will capture what it needs based on anything that needs to come forward. It's not required on an IFSP form. And so we took it off of there and left it into the database side. You still will be gathering that information. It just doesn't show up on the IFSP. So what is on the page is the child's actual health history. There will be much more room so that you can update this as you go, as changes happen. As a reminder, it must be at least annually updated. Nutrition, vision, and hearing also must at least be updated annually. If your initial vision and hearing result in anything other than a pass, the child passed the screening or is being followed by vision professionals and hearing professionals, then that follow-up needs to be done by the 6-month review. That's what the secondary date and results concerns is for. So if you get other than a pass, make sure that you are filling in at the 6-month review what that follow-up was. Any questions on that? I think that's been pretty standard and understood for a while, but I'm not hearing any, so I'm going to move forward. Here's a page that looks just like it always has, and it also looks like this on the database side. So this is one of the, no, has to look just like this, changes that we said. We absolutely have this. There will be, we believe, unlimited room to write the My Child story. There are additional panels in the database to capture evaluation and assessment information. These include just the spaces where you can enter, that 1A, 1B, and 1C information. You can do it just the way you always have. The database has the ability to capture more information than that, but at this time, we don't think you will be required to do anything more than what you currently are doing with that information. So if you continue to just fill it out here, that will be fine. To review for any new people who might be here, the evaluation information, that's the CBA that you use, the curriculum-based assessment, and it is updated annually in order to do ongoing, to show ongoing assessment purposes, and for completion of the ECHO. That's where I'm saying it's not done to redetermine eligibility. We don't go back to the eligibility page. We keep that information on 1A. 1B is the RBI. Typically, that's what's used. If you're using something else, then it would be that. The assessment is updated annually as well for the annual IFSP process. So at least annually, we are updating it there. In our current procedure manual, we are updating assessment every 6 months. So just to be aware of that as well. And then you write your My Child story, and we have, oh, I'm sorry, 1C. I didn't go into 1C. 1C is not your RBI or your CBA. It is that every evaluation and assessment process has to include additional informal measures. And so this is where we say we did observations, we got parent report, parents may or may not have filled out any kind of a checklist. All of that can be added there. So that our evaluation and assessment process is robust and not just the 2 tools that we used. Summary of development. As I said, it's the same. We hope that the prompts at the side are helpful in keeping true to what we're looking at, what we're looking for in terms of what typical routines and activities look like with this family, within each of the activities, what the child's interactions with others, the child's learning within the activity, what they need help with, what their independent participation is reported to be, anything within the narrative, so that a reader would be able to identify a child's skills and abilities within all the developmental information that's included within those routines and activities. So yes, we have to have cognitive and social emotional and speech language, all those areas of development represented, but we do not write this in that kind of a way. We write it in a holistic way because we don't pull children apart that way. And then question number 3, again, this is the question is, what are the routines and activities that the team will address? And so we want what's there to be within the context of a routine or activity as their focus. This isn't the same as a listing of the skills that the family wants to work on. That would be the concerns or priorities that a family has. We help a family during this part of completion to take those concerns and bring them into the context of a routine or activity. So for example, child's participation in meal times. There's so many things we could work on, coming to the table when called, independently getting into their own chair, making choices of food items. We want to make sure that our answer to number 3 leads us into outcome development. Yeah. And that's all I'm going to say. Any questions? People are good with my child's stories. No changes to the ECHO outcome page. We do think it looks a little different in the database. Not exactly sure about that. Tammy, do you have more information? It looks a little different.
Yeah, I feel like it does a little bit, but I think it's a tweaking formatting thing. It's not the words.
None of the information is different.
Yeah.
None of the processes are different. How we complete the echoes is not changing what they stand for. So echoes we complete at the initial IFSP meeting and all annual IFSP meetings. And then we have the echo exit, which is separate, that's done whenever the family leaves. So it includes, reviewing all of the evaluation and assessment information, getting input from the family, completing these together with the family, using the decision tree and some age anchoring tools or any other tools that you find helpful in your team meetings in order to complete the ECHO page. Family concerns and resources page looks exactly the same as it always has. So it also looks very similar in the database. A little bit different, again, those tweaks, but you'll clearly be able to identify it, and the different boxes to be completed are basically the same. So the purpose of the family assessment is to identify families' resources, priorities, and concerns, and the supports and services necessary to enhance the family's capacity to meet their child's developmental needs. This is a continuation. I know we do a lot of our My Child Story based on family input, but this is the place where we're documenting the requirement that we have these pieces as well. If you do an ECHO map as part of your RBI, that can be, this page gets really robust and full of information. If you don't do an ECHO map, but have a different way of including those ECHO questions into your conversations with families, that can be very helpful. But the purpose is to build on resources and supports that the family has in order to come up with our outcome statements and make our outcome statements as helpful to families as they can be and as natural to the families as they can be. Number 1 on this page auto-populates from the RBI information, and it will continue to do that in the new database. The priorities of families, these are the concerns a family has. They're often expressed as developmental needs, like I want them to walk more, I want them to talk more. It also could be changes they want to see to their daily routines and activities. things that are either currently happening or that they'd like to have happen. Family needs can be listed here. It's important to remember that every priority does not necessarily have to result in an outcome, but every outcome you write must relate back to one of these priorities of the family. The updating this page at times of reviews or times of annual IFSPs helps you stay compliant with that rule as you make new outcomes for families. Resources that support the families and in what way. So thinking about your echo map ideas, immediate family, extended family, friends from work or the neighborhood, specific events or organizations, space for anything else that we may have forgotten or not covered. Anything important to the family, that goes in number 4. Oftentimes I see scheduling considerations might be mentioned here. The other thing I want to say about priorities of the family is we are seeing it done in a multiple of ways. When it comes to priorities, we are not thinking necessarily that it has to be like this is number 1 and number 2 and number 3, as much as these are the things that are really important to us. And we can work on as many of those or as few of those as the family wishes to. Any questions about that?
You're good with that too.
Yeah. Other services. This has changed a bit because we feel this format might be more clear for people. So what this page has always been about is identifying the services outside of our system that a family already has and those that they need or want to explore. And so instead of trying to get that second number 2 done at the bottom of the page, we've made 2 columns now. So column 1 is what the family has, and column 2 is what they want to explore or need more information about. In addition, what it says at the top of the page is changed slightly. So it reinforces that the family service coordinator responsibility in regard to this page is that those additional services are things that the FSC would help the family learn about, make sure that they get, assist the family in securing those, whatever is going to be helpful for the development of the family outcomes. So we've built in the reason why right into that opening statement. So the expectation is that as you go from IFSP meeting to IFSP meeting, these checkboxes change because what they need or wanted to explore may become something in the future that they now have or not. They may explore it and decide not to participate in that, or they may not qualify for some of those things. So those changes over time we would expect to see between IFSP meetings. The other thing, I think this looks different in the database side. So when you're filling this out, you don't see this page with all of these things. You see a drop-down box. So when you go to a certain area, you'll hit a drop-down and then you'll find which ones the family still wants and which ones the family needs. Anything else about this page that you might have questions about? The outcome page in the database panels looks very similar to the IFSP page. Just to review quickly on an IFSP outcome requirements, there has to be at least 1 child outcome at all times that you are working on. If not, you need a review to write some new outcomes. All the boxes get filled out based on where you are with that outcome. Progress is recorded at least every 6 months. So following that timeline. The flow of information is that outcomes come from gathering all that information up to this point, the My Child story, the family resources, concerns and priorities, the services they have in place, and they need, and the services that they need, all of that can be useful in developing an outcome. Outcome number will be assigned by the database in the future. Right now, I believe programs are doing it differently based on what works for them. In the future, it will be assigned by the database in the new database system. Start date will continue to be there. So whenever an outcome is started, but the target date has been removed. There was a lot of confusion in how people were using the target date and updating the target date. It's not a necessary need as far as regulations go, so we've decided to take it out. In Kansas, of course, we plan outcomes to last for about a 6-month time frame. We want families to feel success in completing an outcome and developing a new outcome. We know from research that families feel they are more successful when that happens for them. So outcomes can only be updated within the context of an IFSP review. And the outcome start dates will correlate to the date of the IFSP that correlates to that review. Sections 4, 5, and 6 on this page kind of work together. What we like to see happen, what's happening now, and how will we know we made progress. We look at those together in terms of, are they functional? Is there a timeline with a goal of progress to be made? This is an area of quality and best practices. So we would see more about routines and activities within those 3 areas than about building skills. What progress have we met? Have we made when we meet our outcomes? Yes and no dates. And again, they are updated every 6 months. As far as the echo area at the bottom of the page, we are looking for the primary target for that outcome. So we are hoping that you are just checking 1. If you absolutely need to check more than that, and it causes you concern, then please do that. But we are looking for the primary target of the outcome. We are hopeful that in the new database, we will be able to pull reports based on these and see which, like, for example, how many family outcomes we have across the state. Any questions about the outcomes page? Just as a reminder, these are all the services available through the program in our state. Any of these services are available to an eligible child. They do not need to qualify for each one individually. There is a plan in your program for how they meet each one of these. It's called a community service plan that the coordinator does each year and updates for the state to make sure that they are able to provide these different services that are required by the regulations. All of these are also defined in policy, including the qualifications of who can implement them. Don't know how much we want to go into them. If you have questions about any of them, please let me know. Examples, assistive tech are things that are more low-tech devices, not things that are implanted into the body. Family training can happen through social work, psychologists. So again, each of them is defined in policy by who can do it and what it looks like in practice. Go on. Yeah. I'm getting a yes, go on. So there are a few changes to the summary of services page coming from both the database and policy changes. But the database page where you enter the information will look like this page. So it's not too much of a change for you. First of all, you will notice that everyone who provides a direct service to the family will be identified on the left-hand column. So you are either doing this as the family service coordinator, as a primary service provider, or as a secondary service provider. So everybody listed gets a check mark now. There can only, as a reminder, there can only be one PSP and one FSC at any given time period. So we would be looking at dates to make sure that there's only one at a time. If it is the same person, then there needs to be two lines, one that identifies that family service coordination is being delivered and the other that identifies their discipline or service to be provided. You can only provide the services for which you have an appropriate educational background as defined in the policy manual. For example, a physical therapy cannot be listed as providing special instruction. She can bill for developmental intervention time, so it gets really confusing sometimes, but she is not providing special instruction unless she also holds an appropriate degree for that discipline. The methods to choose from are on our list. Does have an other, and if you choose other, then you must explain it in the service description. Most FSC and PSP visits are face-to-face. Most joint visits, most SSPs, secondary service providers, will be doing joint visits. The number of visits, in what period of time, and for how long are designed so that you can get the most flexibility as possible within your schedule. We want you to be able to do that in a way that makes sense. And like I said, gives you that flexibility. The location, the thing to know about location, that if the child is seen equally in two locations, then we need to make sure that there are two lines for that service. So if you are going into childcare and also going to the family home, in about equal amounts, we have two lines for that service. If occasionally you go to one or the other place, just put that in a service description. That covers that. This is designed just to have direct services. So we know that FSCs do a lot, and sometimes PSPs or someone else outside of a direct one-on-one situation with the family. That should be covered in either that summary of services description that's at the top of this page, or can be outlined in the service description, however your program likes it to be. The change of policy about the start and end date. There is a planned start date you will see here, and then the end date. So the policy change is that the planned start date for the FSC should be the date of the IFSP meeting, because that's what's being done that day, is that you're having the IFSP meeting. So you're there as the FSC, you're completing the paperwork. That's the day that the FSC starts. The planned start date for all other services for the PSP and SSP following the new policy starting July 1st would be the next day that you're going to come. So after the IFSP meeting, if you are planning to be there in 2 weeks from that date, or next week on Thursday, whatever it is, you would write that date. So that's the policy change that will have an effect on how this page is completed. So again, it's typically within 2 weeks. The service provider can deliver the service on the same day as the IFSP. This can only be done and counted as your first service if it follows whatever you have written at that on that service line. So if you are staying after the IFSP, your IFSP meeting has an end time, your service would have a start time, and they cannot overlap. And then the service that you provide has to meet whatever you've written. So if your visits are going to be 45 minutes, then you stay for 45 minutes. Sometimes in an IFSP meeting, you could put on your PSP hat momentarily and give families a couple of suggestions on things to do before you come to that first visit. That does not count as your first visit. Most of the time, your first visit would be the next time. It would reflect a 1 to 2 week difference, maybe. And then you would have the planned start date for services typically happens within 30 days. You have 30 days to meet that date. So if your first visit actually happens a week later than expected, you're still within your 30 days. You're going to be fine. More details about the policy will come to you. So I don't want to go into too much of the weeds right now. What you need to know for filling out the form is that change that I just went through.
So there's a couple of questions that
Sure.
as you kind of look in the chat, that I don't know, that are good to know. So we do know that in the new database, the IFSP is going to be different than your previous IFSP. So yes, there will be some wonkiness in a transition period where as you do reviews, you're going to have to add this information in and update things. And they are putting as much information as they possibly can into the database. So you have to do that as minimally as possible. But things specifically like this page that have some changes, when you import off, you will have to correct the changes and kind of keep going. So just know, yes, it will look a little different. There might be some retyping. You're going to have to fill some things in, especially when you update and get things current. Oh, what else is in here? Yes, with like Barbara said, we're not going to go into how do I know, how am I going to determine which provider to use, how often to use them, how do I figure that out? As we get closer, we're going to have more meetings to talk through how the policies are going to look implemented and suggestions, ways, supports to make those determinations. But I don't know if are there anything in there, Barbara, that you feel like is a now?
I'm not seeing the chat. So
Okay.
number one, as far as making decisions on who, I mean, we
So
do
for
that
you,
now.
it's things like, how will the change, what if I don't know exactly when the second provider can start? What is it going to look like if I change that second provider? It's really that process of honing in, that's the purpose of the policy, is to help hone in and really think about when do I need them? How do I need them? And it is going to be a change in the way we think. We are going to have to think about secondary providers more intentionally to be able to do this well. And we are going to need to have spaces and places to have communications with providers when we know we're going to need a secondary provider. So that's good for us to know what trainings and supports. I was trying to see what else.
What we do have, just to make sure that it's understood, we have a 30-day window. So if you think your secondary provider is going to come a month later, you write their first visit date is a month from now. You still have 30 days from that date to make sure that they get there. If services are not happening as planned, I believe the new database has that on your dashboard. Hey, this service is supposed to happen. So that will be helpful in following those services. You can always do a review and move it. You can always do a review and delete it if it's no longer needed. The idea is still that this is a plan. This actually gives you a little bit more flexibility because you've always only had 30 days. This gives you a little bit more in that you are planning that this will happen more in the future. We will have more guidance. You will have more training. I wanted to introduce it today. I wanted to make sure people knew what was happening and why the IFSP looks different, and had a taste of what the conversation has been around how we need to do this page in the future. So let's move on, unless you're seeing anything else, Tammy. Okay. Description of services, it's not changed. The intent is still to explain anything that is not evident on, whoa.
Sorry, this might be a good one. Can you talk through how outcome start dates coincides with the summary of the service pages? So you always have to have an outcome, but it doesn't necessarily have to completely align with the start date. It's going to depend where the child is at services, going to depend on whether you reviewed an outcome, discontinued an outcome, but you should always have an outcome that is current and you are working on it during any duration piece of the services. Sorry.
No. That's great to try and get as many of these answered as we can. Description of services, as I said, has not changed. So the intent is to explain anything that's not on the service table. You do not need to reiterate what's already on the service table, but how you're going to be implementing those services. So that includes things like explanations of front loading, how services are going to play out over time, other FSC duties that you might be exploring that you know about at that point in time, any breaks that are planned, any secondary services explanation. The funding statement has been updated. You will now only need to check boxes, or basically on the database side, it might be choosing from a dropdown the funding sources that apply to this specific child. We have made a statement at the beginning that all of the funding that applies to all children does not have to be specified. So only if these things apply to that specific child would you add a checkbox. Let's see, natural environments justification. I believe there is no longer going to be a yes, no box, that it will, if you need to fill this out, you will fill it out. It is okay to sometimes provide services in a non-natural environment, as long as you explain why you're doing that and what your plan is for returning to a natural environment. This is highly individualized based on every family situation. And also there could be staff considerations, staff safety considerations. It is not held against you in any way if you use a non-natural environment in this way. You will get cited if you use a non-natural environment and don't fill out this section. So if that is happening for whatever reason it needs to happen, please fill out this section. It's not for things like we just have a preference, or mom doesn't want us to come to her house. We want to look for, we still have that requirement that we look for all other kinds of natural environments first before we use this. Any questions? Not seeing any. So the IFSP agreement page looks the
So-
same. Oops.
It says, what does the state currently consent? Do you have some examples of non-natural environments? One would be your office
Your office. Offices, anybody's office.
or your building. Yeah.
Your building in general. Yeah.
I feel
Uh,
like then there's some feedback that we can look at later.
Okay. IFSP agreement page looks the same. Parents will be able to sign electronically. You can get a paper signature and attach it. State office will now have access to all the IFSP agreement pages, so they'll be able to see that families have signed. At the top, the parent is agreeing to waive their 10-day wait period for services to start. If they don't initial their service start dates have to be adjusted. This would only now apply to FSC unless other services were also going to start 1 week later. The middle part of this is that you do or do not accept the services as written, and any changes that a family might want to make. And then at the bottom, the parent's consent. Yeah, and most families, they've done this plan with us, so they are typically agreeing. This is the page where we say 2 people contributed to the development of the IFSP. So the changes to the page is that we no longer have written signatures. You will just have a listing of the persons involved and their information. In addition to the FSC, that second person, if they attend, they'd be at the top. If they don't attend and participate in some other way, either electronically or through written documentation, which includes quarterly reports and coaching session notes that happen during teaming, that's the second box. So when we were talking about those 2 disciplines from 2 different, 2 people from 2 different disciplines, that's what we were talking about. I did not include the transition training pages because the transition training happens in 2 weeks, and we want to be able to present the pages along with the proposed policies. There's quite a bit of changes to the transition that will emphasize more of a community transition rather than just a simple C to B transition. So this is a teaser so that you come to the next training too. We will have available draft copies of the transition pages, just like we have the rest of the IFSP available today. So transition pages in 2 weeks. We continue to have IFSP review signature sheets. So the initial and annual signature sheets look exactly like the review signature sheets. It simply at the top here says review. And we've continued to have those that are specifically for the review. What you do not see as part of the review is a review summary page. Because you have to go into the database side and the database panels in order to update an IFSP, we no longer have an open summary page where you can write out what you are doing instead of updating those database pages. So there is no longer a summary page, just the signature pages. Any questions on that?
I just had a question back to the IFSP signature page. Since all of these forms are getting changed, is it not possible to move those buttons around where the I do give consent shows up first and I do not give consent is the one that's down closer to the parent signature? Because I would say 6 times out of 10, I'll have families that, I've never had a family mark I do not give consent intentionally, if that makes sense. And so when we're using our DocuSign form, there's no way for us to go change it. And so if that's something that can be looked at and it hasn't been finalized yet, that would be wonderful.
That's a really good idea, and we'll take that under consideration and share that with the state office as well. It is small tweaks like that that are still possible. If my understanding is right. So we will share that with them, Jennifer.
And I'm not going to walk them through, but there's a couple other chiming in with similar type feedback of
I
tweaks.
feel like
help with this.
if we're at the IFSP, it's usually because they want the services. So I don't think they're ever going to say I don't want them. So I just wonder if the refusal could be something completely different. Like if there was a page that said we're refusing services. I mean, we have a withdrawal form, but like a refusal page instead of on the agreement page.
Right. It is federally required that this be here, so it's not going to go away in any way. And the family has the right to refuse some, but not all services. So you could say to a family, I really think a secondary provider should come and do some joint visits with us. And the family can say, no, I don't want that. Most people would not write it down then, right? You wouldn't have written it in the first place. But if you had already written it, and then before they're signing, they're kind of reconsidering, it's where you would jot something like that down. We don't see it used very often. And like Jennifer said, she's never used it. I don't know that I have reviewed an IFSP as a reviewer that has it. So it's a good point. It can't go away, but can we make it easier to use? Fingers crossed. All right. In the Basecamp file, there's the forum. Tammy has already put that in the chat. I think there could be other copies floating around. At this point, it still says draft because we are doing those tweaks. I also put in the IFSP guidance document for anybody who's new and didn't know that it existed. The guidance document is step by step. It goes through every item on the IFSP and says what's supposed to be in there. We are always tweaking on that too. We are aware that there needs to be tweaks. It's going to be updated so that it follows the new IFSP. And hopefully those tweaks will get in there so that we are more clear on things like when we say this needs to be updated annually. What does that mean, updated annually? What are you looking for at that annual review? So hopefully we can get more clarity to you guys on some of the things that are in there. But if you don't know about it, it is helpful and can be helpful to you between now and July 1st for sure. The next meeting is 2 weeks from now, Thursday, January 22nd. The third meeting is February 5th, and that's the intro to the database. So transition in 2 weeks, and then looking into the database 2 weeks after that. Again, we will have additional modules and in-person trainings. We're planning the whole month of March right now. Those training modules will be available to us as a library, so you will have ongoing access to any module as we get up and going. There are step-by-step. Some people are testing those out for us and involved in testing of those. So we'll have training aids available. This was an overview. I hope it helps calm some fears. The IFSP is changing a bit, but not super dramatically. Anything else in the chat, Tammy? We have about 10 minutes.
We will get out the projected in-person trainings dates. Our goal, I probably shouldn't say this out loud. Our goal is to get it to you by February, by the February 6th meeting, and have that in a format that we can actually share.
We can share that there are 3 in-person meetings being planned, that we will plan those based on the size of your program. So we have a limited number seats. The smaller your program, the less people you will bring. The larger your program, you won't be able to bring everybody. The webinars that are planned are on very specific topics like the IFSP. And they'll go into a lot of detail about how to complete it in the database. That will be live webinar possibilities, hopefully multiple of those throughout the month of March, and followed up by we get it. When she's done, we get that module. And so we will always have access to it. So we are trying to be as equitable as we can across all the programs and make sure that people get the training that they need. Our state teams are being trained in addition, so that we can be a resource to you as well. I hope you feel you're not alone. We're all in this together. If there are other questions or you have other comments, please feel free. 2 hours. Feel free to put them in the chat, and or feel free at this point to come off mute and ask us if you want. We will stick around for these last 10 minutes, but if you don't have anything to stick around for, you get, now it is 8 minutes back of your day. And thank you for coming.